This video describes how to use your camcorder's zebra patterns to check exposure on the set. After defining exposure, I'll discuss the controls on your camcorder that affect exposure and describe when and how to use them. Then I'll discuss the elements of optimal exposure and discuss how to use your camcorder's zebra stripes to make sure that you achieve optimal exposure on the set. Let's discuss exposure for a moment. Exposure is how much light gets into the camcorder's inner sensors. The most accurate way to check exposure on the set is with a waveform monitor, a test appliance that connects to your camcorder and graphically displays the brightness of the incoming video signal. Or, if you have a laptop handy, you can use Adobe's On Location, a software program with the waveform monitor built in. Or even capture some video while on location and test it in your editor's waveform monitor, which I discuss in a later chapter. Or, you can use your camcorder zebra controls, which I demonstrate in this video. There are three main camera controls that impact exposure. The first is gain, which electronically brightens the signal, almost always introducing noise into the video. For example, note how the noise in the background jumps when I boost gain and brighten this video. At lower data rates, noise causes ugly compression artifacts. For this reason, it's best to set gain to 0, as you see here, and use other controls to adjust exposure. The second exposure-related control is shutter speed, which controls how long the shutter stays open for each frame. Slower shutter speeds let in more light, but also introduce the potential for blurriness, as you see here in these comparison images. For this reason, in a studio setting, most producers leave their shutter speed at 60, or 1/60th of a second, and then adjust aperture until the video is properly exposed. So let's look at aperture. Aperture controls how much light gets into the lens using an iris and adjustments measured in f-stops. Paradoxically, the smaller the f-stop, the larger the opening, so you increase f-stops to contract the iris and reduce the amount of light getting into the lens. Since aperture has no side effects like noise or blurriness, it's the best adjustment for controlling exposure. We'll look at how to control aperture in a moment. Now let's answer the question, how do you know how much light to let in? To answer that question, let's take a quick look at a waveform monitor. A waveform monitor displays brightness as a waveform along the IRE scale, which stands for Institute of Radio Engineers. This is the YC waveform monitor from Premiere Pro. You access it in the program or source monitors by clicking here. On the left is a vertical scale from -20 to 120 on the IRE scale, which is a measure of brightness. Areas above 100 IRE are too bright for your camcorder to capture, and areas below 7.5 IRE are too dark, so detail gets lost. When setting exposure, you want to make sure that your whites, in this case the white balance card, are close to but don't exceed 100 IRE, and that your blacks, in this case the black curtain, are no lower than 7.5. Obviously, it's helpful to set exposure with a white balance card in the frame, because that ensures that there is pure white in the frame. Now, how does your camcorder help you stay within these limits? Well, that's where your zebra stripes come in. Zebra stripes are stripes inserted by the camcorder where levels reach a specified range, usually either 100 or 70 IRE, as you can see here on the switch for my Sony VX2000. 100, of course, is the upper limit for whites, while 70 is the range for well-lit Caucasian skin highlights. Some videographers use 70 IRE, figuring that the skin is the most important object in the frame. I prefer using 100, and that's what I'll demonstrate. When using the 100 setting, turn zebra stripes on and adjust the aperture until the zebra stripes disappear, in this shot at an aperture setting of 2.8. Then, as a check, click your camcorder into automatic mode. Assuming that you have whites in the scene, automatic mode will generally boost them to 100 IRE. Assuming your manual settings are close to the automatic settings in color and brightness, as we are here, you're probably good to go. If there's a major difference in either, your white balance or your exposure is off. Note that if your exposure is a bit low, you can always boost it during editing, which I describe how to do in a later chapter. If it's too bright, however, the detail is probably lost forever. Let's summarize. Though there are three controls that affect exposure, gain, shutter speed, and aperture, you'll probably want to set gain to 0, shutter speed to 60, and use aperture to correct your exposure. Ideally, lighting and exposure should yield whites below 100 IRE and blacks above 7.5 IRE. If you don't have a waveform monitor, use zebra stripes in the camcorder to assess exposure. If your zebras are set to 100, open your aperture until the zebra stripes disappear. If set at 70, adjust your aperture until the face is bathed in zebra stripes, but remember, it only works for Caucasian faces. A white balance card ensures that you have white in the scene, and also helps if you need to white balance during editing. Make a practice of using a white balance card when setting exposure. Finally, when setting exposure, err on the low side. It's better to be a little underexposed and protect your detail than overexposed and lose it.